Let me start with something uncomfortable. The kind of uncomfortable that makes people shift in their seats, look at their phones, or suddenly decide this conversation is too dark. Because the truth is, the greatest crimes don't grow in darkness alone, they grow in silence. And silence is often dressed up as politeness, as denial, as that's not my business. Tonight isn't about one man, it's about a system, a culture. A pattern that whispers a lie into our world that power can purchase people, that money can erase harm, that young girls can be reduced to transactions. And here's why you need to stay with me all the way through this. Because the moment we believe this is only about monsters and headlines, we miss the quiet ways our everyday choices either protect the vulnerable or protect the powerful. This crime forces us to look at something deeper than scandal. It forces us to look at how vulnerability works in a world addicted to status. Young girls don't get targeted because they are weak. They get targeted because someone sees their need for safety, attention, stability, and decides that need is an opportunity. That is not seduction. That is not consent. That is exploitation of vulnerability. And any culture that worships wealth and influence more than human dignity creates cover for that exploitation. And then comes shame. Shame is the real accomplice. Shame says to victims, this was your fault. You were there. You didn't say no loud enough. You should have known better. Shame locks the truth inside the people who most need to speak. It convinces them they will be blamed, doubted, picked apart. So the crime doesn't just happen once. It happens again in silence, in courtrooms, in headlines, in comment sections where strangers judge what they've never had to survive. We also have to talk about the myth of importance. We have built a dangerous belief that success equals character. That wealthy, connected, celebrated people are somehow less capable of harm. But power doesn't erase moral failure, it amplifies it. When influence replaces accountability, systems bend. Doors open. Questions stop being asked, and suddenly harm hides behind reputation. But here's the part that asks something of us. Not just outrage, responsibility. Because systems don't operate alone, they rely on bystanders. The assistant who doesn't ask questions. The friend who laughs off rumors. The institution that prioritizes image over investigation. Most people in harmful systems don't wake up planning to enable abuse. They just choose comfort over courage again and again until their silence becomes part of the machinery. There is a difference between gossip and moral courage. Gossip consumes stories for entertainment. Moral courage tells the truth to protect people. One feeds spectacle, the other demands risk. And protecting girls, protecting any vulnerable person, isn't about sharing shocking details. It's about building cultures where boundaries are respected, where young people are believed, where power is questioned, not worshipped. Accountability matters deeply. But accountability isn't about rage for the sake of rage. It's about clarity. Harm happened, people were exploited. That cannot be softened, spun, or excused by status, charm, or connections. Accountability says human beings are not commodities, ever. And we can hold that line without losing our own humanity. But we cannot hold it if we are afraid. So where does that leave us? Not helpless. Responsible. Responsible for what jokes we tolerate. For what behavior we dismiss as just how powerful men are. For whether we believe young voices or interrogate them. For whether we teach our sons about respect and our daughters about worth. Cultural change doesn't begin in courtrooms alone. It begins in living rooms, schools, friendships, and institutions where dignity is either protected or traded. No girls for sale is not a slogan. It's a line in the sand. It's a declaration that vulnerability is not an invitation for exploitation. That power without integrity is dangerous. That silence is not neutral. And that courage, messy, uncomfortable, voice-shaking courage, is how we break cycles that have hidden in plain sight for too long. And the question we leave with isn't, how could this happen? The real question is, what are we willing to do to make sure it doesn't happen again? Ex pendar keonis conti waitan and kongsi usium. There is a story we tell ourselves about power that is so polished, so repeated, that we rarely stop to question it. We tell ourselves that powerful spaces are safer, that wealth signals success, that influence must be earned through intelligence or talent. And because we believe that story, we lower our guard. We assume someone else must have checked, someone else must know better. Someone else would speak up if something were wrong. That belief is comforting. It lets us move through the world without constantly scanning for danger. But it is also the very belief that creates perfect cover for harm. Silence doesn't usually feel like complicity in the moment. It feels like uncertainty. It sounds like, I don't know the full story. It looks like looking away when something feels off but inconvenient to question. Silence often wears the costume of politeness. We don't want to accuse. We don't want to seem dramatic. We don't want to risk being wrong. So we wait, and in that waiting, harm finds room to breathe. The most dangerous systems are not built only by those who do evil. They are sustained by ordinary people who convince themselves that discomfort is not a good enough reason to act. We are wired for belonging. We are wired to stay inside the group, to not be the one who disrupts the room. So when power is in the room, money, fame, status, the pressure to stay quiet multiplies. We tell ourselves, if this were serious, someone higher up would handle it. But harmful systems often depend on that exact assumption. Responsibility gets passed upward until it disappears. There is also a lie about proximity to power. We think being close to important people makes us safer, more significant, more secure. So we protect access. We protect the invitation, the job, the connection. And we do it in small ways that feel harmless. Laughing off a comment that made us uneasy, ignoring a rumor because we don't want to be that person. Staying neutral because neutrality feels mature. But neutrality in the face of exploitation is not neutral for the vulnerable. It is protection for the powerful. Silence grows strongest in environments where image matters more than truth. When reputation becomes sacred, questioning becomes betrayal. People start managing optics instead of addressing reality. Concerns are reframed as misunderstandings. Patterns are dismissed as coincidences. And those who speak up are labeled dramatic, unstable, attention-seeking. That labeling is not accidental. It is a social warning to everyone else. This is what happens when you disrupt the narrative. The cost of this silence is not abstract. It is carried by those with the least power to defend themselves. When no one names what is happening, the person experiencing harm often believes they are alone. Isolation deepens shame, shame deepens silence, and the cycle tightens. Meanwhile, those on the outside tell themselves they had no idea, when often the truth is they had fragments, moments, feelings, red flags that they talked themselves out of trusting. Breaking silence requires something we are rarely taught to value: the willingness to be uncomfortable in public, to ask the question that changes the mood, to say, that doesn't sit right with me, even when voices shake. It requires trusting our moral instincts over social ease. It means accepting that we might lose approval, access, or status in exchange for integrity. And that trade is terrifying, especially in cultures that reward compliance and punish disruption. But every system built on secrecy fears one thing more than exposure from the outside: ordinary people, inside, choosing courage over comfort. One person naming what others feel but won't say can shift the air in a room. Silence is not just absence of sound, it is the presence of fear. And when even one voice chooses truth over belonging, that fear starts to lose its grip. We like to believe exploitation is about force alone, about obvious threats and visible coercion. That belief helps us distance ourselves from it. But in reality, exploitation often begins in something far quieter: the careful study of vulnerability. Not vulnerability as weakness, but vulnerability as unmet need. The need to feel seen, the need to feel valued, the need to feel safe, chosen, important. These are human needs, not flaws. Yet in a culture obsessed with status, those needs become entry points for manipulation. A status-driven world teaches a dangerous equation: early proximity to power equals worth. We learn to admire wealth, to equate luxury with success, to assume that people with influence must also have integrity. For a young person, especially one still forming identity, boundaries, and self-trust, attention from someone powerful can feel like validation, like opportunity, like escape. The environment itself does part of the grooming. Expensive settings, exclusive spaces, high-profile connections all create an illusion of safety and importance. The message is subtle but powerful: you are lucky to be here. Exploitation thrives in that illusion. Because when status is the currency, questioning feels like ingratitude. Discomfort gets reframed as misunderstanding. Red flags get painted gold. A young girl who has been made to feel special, chosen, elevated above her circumstances may struggle to reconcile that feeling with the unease in her body. The mind looks for a story that makes sense. Maybe this is normal. Maybe this is how powerful people act. Maybe saying no would ruin everything. Manipulators rely on that internal conflict. They don't just override boundaries. They blur them until the person can't see where the line was. There is also the power of contrast. When someone comes from instability, neglect, financial strain, or emotional loneliness, sudden generosity can feel like rescue. Gifts, attention, promises of mentorship, or opportunity create a sense of debt. And debt, even when unspoken, is a powerful leash. The exploited person may feel they owe compliance, gratitude, silence. This is not consent born of freedom. It is compliance born of psychological pressure. Yet from the outside, it can look voluntary, which deepens the harm because it invites judgment instead of protection. Status culture also protects perpetrators by shaping how we interpret behavior. When an influential person crosses a boundary, people around them often reinterpret it through the lens of admiration. Just well connected. That's how elite circles are. Harmful behavior gets normalized as personality, success, or eccentricity. Meanwhile, the vulnerable person is scrutinized. What were they doing there? What were they wearing? Why did they go back? The focus shifts from the misuse of power to the actions of the person with the least power. That reversal is not accidental. It is how systems protect themselves. Another layer is isolation. Status-based environments can separate young people from their usual support systems. Travel, secrecy, exclusive invitations, all of it reduces outside perspective. Without trusted voices to reality, check the situation. The manipulator's version of events grows louder. Doubt gets redirected inward. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is what success requires. The exploited person begins managing the powerful person's feelings, reputation, and expectations, which is a heavy psychological load for anyone, let alone someone still developing emotionally. What makes this especially painful is that the very qualities targeted: openness, hope, desire for connection, ambition, are signs of life, not liability. The tragedy is not that vulnerable people exist, it's that some choose to weaponize vulnerability for control. A healthy culture would respond to vulnerability with protection, mentorship with boundaries, opportunity with safeguards. But a status-assessed culture too often responds with access that can be twisted into entitlement over another human being. Understanding this shifts the question from why didn't they just leave to who created a situation where leaving felt impossible. It moves the focus from individual choices made under pressure to the larger values that made exploitation easier to hide. When we stop worshiping status and start centering dignity, vulnerability stops being a doorway for harm and becomes what it was always meant to be: a bridge for care, connection, and responsibility. Shame is one of the quietest, most effective tools in the aftermath of harm. It doesn't arrive loudly. It seeps in. It changes how a person remembers, how they speak, how they carry their own story. After exploitation, the first question many victims ask is not, "Why did they do this?" It's, "What did I do wrong?" That question is the fingerprint of shame. It turns a violation into a personal failure, as if someone else's abuse of power could somehow be traced back to the worth of the person harmed. Shame thrives on isolation. It tells people they are the only one, that their experience is too messy, too embarrassing, too complicated to share. It whispers that others will see them differently, as damaged, foolish, complicit. And because humans are wired for belonging, the fear of losing connection can feel more dangerous than the harm itself. So the story stays locked inside. Silence grows and shame grows with it. What makes shame such a powerful weapon in cases of exploitation is that the surrounding culture often unknowingly helps it. We ask questions that sound reasonable but carry blame underneath. Why were you there? Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you say something sooner? Each of these questions assumes control that may not have existed. They overlook fear, manipulation, power imbalance, psychological pressure. But to the person who lived it, those questions land like confirmation. You should have known. You should have stopped it. This is partly on you. Shame also distorts memory and identity. A person may replay events again and again, searching for the moment they could have changed the outcome. They may focus on their own behavior, what they wore, said, agreed to, instead of the choices of the person who exploited them. Over time, this can reshape how they see themselves. Instead of "I was harmed," the story becomes "I am someone this happens to." That shift is devastating because it moves the harm from an event to an identity. Another way shame protects abusers is by attacking credibility before a person even speaks. Victims know, often from watching others, that they may be doubted, dissected, or publicly judged. They anticipate their past being pulled apart, their motives questioned, their pain compared to someone else's. So shame acts as a preemptive silencer. It says, "Stay quiet. It's safer." And in that quiet, systems remain intact. Shame is particularly strong when exploitation involved manipulation disguised as care or opportunity. Victims may feel conflicted because there were moments of kindness, attention, or perceived choice. That complexity can deepen shame. How can I call this abuse if I didn't fight the whole time? But trauma responses are not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes survival looks like compliance, freezing, or trying to please the person with power. Shame convinces people these responses mean consent, when in reality they often signal fear and self-protection. Breaking shame requires something deeply countercultural, being met with belief and empathy instead of interrogation. When someone says, "I'm so sorry this happened," instead of "Why didn't you?" the story begins to shift. Shame cannot survive being spoken in safe spaces. It feeds on secrecy, but it weakens in connection. When survivors hear, "You are not alone," and "This was not your fault," the burden begins to move back where it belongs, onto the person who caused harm. But this isn't just about individual healing. It's about cultural responsibility. Every time we respond to stories of exploitation with curiosity about the victim instead of accountability for the abuser, we reinforce shame's power. Every joke, every dismissive comment, every public doubt teaches others to stay silent. And silence is exactly what shame needs to keep doing its job. When we understand shame as a social weapon, not a private flaw, we see the real work. The work is creating environments where telling the truth does not cost someone their dignity, where being harmed does not become a source of humiliation, where the question shifts from "What's wrong with you?" to "What happened to you and how do we make sure it stops?" That shift doesn't erase pain, but it breaks shame's hold. And that is where real justice and healing can begin. We have a deeply ingrained story about success that goes something like this: people rise because they are talented, disciplined, visionary. We wrap achievement in moral language. We say someone earned their place as if professional success and personal character are the same thing. And when we blur those lines, we create a dangerous blind spot. Because if we believe that influence is proof of goodness, then evidence of harm feels like a contradiction we'd rather resolve by doubting the harm than questioning the person. Status acts like a shield. When someone is wealthy, connected, celebrated, or powerful, people around them often experience what psychologists call halo effect. Positive traits in one area spill over into assumptions about other areas. He built an empire. He must be smart. She donates to charity. She must be kind. They're respected in their field. They wouldn't risk something like that. These assumptions feel logical, but they are shortcuts, and shortcuts are exactly what harmful people learn to navigate. Power also changes the environment around a person. The more influence someone has, the fewer people feel safe challenging them. Employees worry about jobs, colleagues worry about access, friends worry about social fallout, institutions worry about funding, reputation, and connections. So questions soften, boundaries blur. Behavior that would raise alarms in an ordinary context gets reframed as eccentricity, stress, or the price of genius. The person doesn't have to demand protection. The system offers it automatically. There's another layer: aspiration. Many people want proximity to power. They want the opportunities, the networks, the doors that might open. That desire can make red flags look like inconveniences rather than warnings. If speaking up threatens someone's career, status, or belonging, the internal calculation becomes complicated. Silence starts to feel practical. And when many people make that same calculation, a protective wall forms around the powerful person without anyone explicitly planning it. We also underestimate how skilled some people are at managing impressions. Harmful individuals with influence often know exactly how to present different versions of themselves. Warm in public, generous in professional settings, charming with peers, these traits create a social defense system. When accusations surface, people who have only experienced the polished version struggle to reconcile it with the possibility of abuse. Instead of updating their view of the person, they question the credibility of the person harmed. "That's not the person I know" becomes a reason to doubt, rather than a reminder that we rarely see the whole picture. The myth that important people can't be dangerous is especially powerful because it protects our worldview. If success does not equal safety, if influence does not equal integrity, then the world feels less predictable. We would have to accept that harm can hide in prestigious spaces, that danger can wear a suit, a title, a respected name. That realization is unsettling. It asks us to trade comfort for awareness. Many people resist that trade. This myth also isolates victims. When the person who harmed them is admired, speaking up feels like standing against a crowd. The victim is not just telling their story, they are challenging a shared belief about someone powerful. That raises the emotional and social cost of disclosure. They may fear backlash, disbelief, or being painted as someone trying to tear down a successful figure. The weight of that narrative can be heavy enough to keep people silent for years. Dismantling this myth doesn't mean assuming powerful people are guilty by default. It means separating achievement from character. It means understanding that influence increases responsibility, not exemption. The higher someone rises, the more safeguards and accountability should surround them, not fewer. Respect for someone's work should never override concern for someone's safety. When we stop equating importance with innocence, we create space for truth to surface. We make it easier to ask hard questions without being accused of envy or disloyalty. We shift from protecting reputations to protecting people. And that shift is essential because harm does not disappear in elite spaces. It just gets better at hiding. Most people do not wake up in the morning planning to help sustain harm. That's what makes bystander dynamics so unsettling. Harmful systems are rarely powered only by the person committing abuse. They are supported by layers of ordinary people making small decisions that feel harmless in isolation. A laugh to ease tension. A topic change. A decision not to report something that felt off, because it might be nothing. Each moment seems minor. Together they form a shield. Being a bystander often starts with ambiguity. Something doesn't sit right, but it's not clear enough to name. Maybe it's a comment that crossed a line, a dynamic that feels unequal, a pattern of private meetings that raises questions. The discomfort is real, but so is the uncertainty. And humans tend to interpret uncertainty in the least disruptive way possible. We tell ourselves we misunderstood, that it's not our place, that someone else closer to the situation will handle it. This diffusion of responsibility is powerful. The more people around, the less each person feels personally accountable. There's also the social risk. Speaking up can mean being labeled difficult, dramatic, disloyal, or namavi. In environments tied to status or opportunity, that risk feels especially high. Jobs, recommendations, access, relationships, all can feel threatened by being the person who raises concerns. So people make a quiet calculation, is this worth the potential cost to me? When the answer is no, silence feels rational, even ethical, because we frame it as minding our own business rather than protecting ourselves. Over time, silence reshapes perception. The more we ignore a behavior, the more normal it starts to seem. What once felt like a red flag becomes just how things are. This normalization doesn't require agreement, it only requires inaction. And when a culture adapts around harmful behavior, newcomers take cues from those already there. If no one else looks alarmed, they assume there's nothing to be alarmed about. The system teaches its own rules without ever stating them. Bystanders can also become emotionally invested in the person with power. They may have positive experiences, professional benefits, or personal loyalty tied to that relationship. When concerns arise, defending the person can feel like defending their own judgment. Admitting harm might mean admitting they missed signs, ignored intuition, or benefited from a system that hurt someone else. That realization can trigger guilt and defensiveness, which often show up as denial. Another factor is how we misunderstand harm. Many people expect exploitation to look dramatic and unmistakable. When it appears subtle, relational, or gradual, bystanders struggle to categorize it as serious. They may wait for a clear line to be crossed, not realizing that harm often happens in increments, testing boundaries, escalating slowly, creating confusion. By the time the situation looks undeniably wrong, patterns may already be deeply entrenched. Yet bystanders also hold immense power. Systems depend on predictability, on people staying in their roles, not questioning, not disrupting. One person interrupting that pattern can change outcomes. Asking a simple question, documenting concerns, checking in with someone who seems uncomfortable, using formal reporting channels, these actions may feel small, but they break the illusion that no one sees. They signal to vulnerable people that they are not alone, and to those misusing power that scrutiny exists. The shift from bystander to upstander is not about heroics. It's about redefining responsibility. Instead of asking, is this my business? The question becomes, if someone is at risk, how can it not be? It means accepting that discomfort is often the first signal that something deserves attention. It means valuing integrity over ease, people over image. Recognizing how ordinary choices sustain systems is not about assigning blanket guilt. It's about reclaiming agency. When we see how silence operates, we also see how interruption works. Harmful systems rely on passive participation. They weaken the moment people choose awareness, voice, and action over the false safety of staying out of it. There is a distinction between gossip and moral courage that is often overlooked, and understanding it is critical when confronting abuse or exploitation. Gossip thrives on stories, rumors, and the thrill of revealing secrets. It is performative, consumable, and often lacks consequence for the powerful. Gossip spreads quickly because it is entertaining, titillating, or scandalous, but it rarely leads to meaningful action or protection for anyone vulnerable. It is designed to satisfy curiosity, not to create accountability. In a way, gossip thrives on distance. The more removed you are from the actual harm, the more thrilling the story becomes. Yet, while gossip spreads information, it rarely spreads responsibility. Moral courage operates differently. It is uncomfortable. It demands honesty, integrity, and accountability. It requires facing fear, the fear of backlash, social isolation, professional consequences, or even personal danger. Moral courage is not performative, it is deliberate. When someone steps forward to protect a vulnerable person or call out abuse, they are not seeking attention or entertainment. They are risking comfort for justice. This distinction is crucial because systems that protect abusers often rely on the presence of gossip rather than courage. Gossip allows bystanders to feel informed without feeling responsible, to feel connected without intervening, to discuss harm without preventing it. The moment we confuse gossip with courage, we fail those who are harmed. We think that talking about an incident is enough, when in reality, it often spreads blame, distorts facts, and undermines trust. Gossip can become a weapon that reinforces shame, isolating victims and keeping the powerful insulated. Moral courage, on the other hand, interrupts these cycles. It challenges the systems that allow exploitation to persist. It elevates truth over perception and prioritizes human dignity over reputation. Where gossip amplifies fear, courage channels fear into action. Where gossip entertains, courage protects. Moral courage also requires awareness of power dynamics. Speaking truth to someone with less influence may feel easier. Speaking truth to someone with greater influence requires strategy, strength, and an understanding of consequences. Courage is often invisible at first because it unfolds in subtle ways, asking difficult questions privately, documenting patterns of abuse, supporting victims in voicing their experiences safely, or advocating for systemic change. These acts rarely make headlines but are critical to breaking cycles of harm. They transform discomfort into protective action, secrecy into accountability. Another important aspect is timing. Gossip can spread instantly, unfiltered, across social networks and workplaces, often causing harm without redress. Courage, by contrast, may require patience. It requires understanding the right moment, the right audience, and the right method to protect the vulnerable while minimizing additional harm. Moral courage is not impulsive, it is deliberate and informed. It prioritizes the needs of those at risk over the convenience of immediate gratification or social popularity. Moral courage also has a contagious quality. When one person demonstrates the willingness to act in the face of injustice, it can shift the culture around them. Others begin to recognize that they too have a role to play, that silence is optional, that truth can be spoken without compromising integrity. Systems that rely on silence are weakened when courage spreads, because the protective walls built by fear, status, and apathy are no longer impermeable. Courage creates accountability, whereas gossip merely circulates awareness. Finally, moral courage is rooted in empathy. It recognizes the humanity of the vulnerable and refuses to reduce them to statistics, rumors, or abstract problems. Courage is relational. It requires listening, believing, and acting in partnership with those harmed. It does not prioritize the comfort of the observer or the reputation of the abuser. Instead, it centers dignity, justice, and responsibility. In this way, moral courage becomes not just an ethical choice, but a cultural imperative. It is the force that transforms silence into protection, fear into accountability, and stories of harm into opportunities for prevention and change.